before we get into the specific, what's the big picture here on these two court rulings today? It looks like the court has, I guess surprisingly, punted in both of these cases.
Yeah, I think the big takeaway here is really that the court ducked. They had an opportunity in front of them in both of these cases, a really clear opportunity, I think, and that's what's so frustrating and sad about today, is that both of these cases were fairly crystal clear as far as what happened.
Mm-hmm.
You laid out Wisconsin really well. 2012 Democrats get 174,000 more votes. Republicans take 60 of the 99 seats.
Mm-hmm.
In Maryland, you had a district, the 6th district, in which more people were shuffled in and out of it than any other district in the country in the 2011 redistricting process. You had a Democratic gerrymander in Maryland. You had the Republican gerrymander in Wisconsin.
Mm-hmm.
It seemed like it was lining up that if the courts had wanted to step in here, they could say it was bipartisan. They had a First Amendment challenge, they had a 14th Amendment challenge, and they had a buffet of statistical standards and evidence that all pointed in the same direction and that revealed exactly what had happened here. And instead, they ducked.
Well, what happened here? Let's start with Wisconsin. You got Gilby Whitford. They had federal court tossed out the entire state legislative map for the Wisconsin State Assembly. On what basis did the court find to? How is it that they came up with a reason to not rule one way or another here? What have they ordered shall happen from here?
Well, the ruling in Wisconsin is that the Democratic voters who brought the lawsuit lacked standing to do so. So essentially that means that they could not prove direct injury to themselves or that their votes had been diluted within their individual districts. So as a result, they could not challenge a statewide map. They still had the opportunity to vote for their representative and to elect their representative, but they were challenging a statewide map and not their individual district map. So the court sent it back to the lower court, which was the federal court. A 3-judge panel ruled on this case a year or so ago, to be re-argued, and essentially invited them to, bring on more plaintiffs or to bring on other, statewide associations, perhaps like a political party, on board, and to go ahead and re-argue that case.
Is the suggestion there that they're going to have to literally, in Wisconsin, argue district by district, find plaintiffs in each district to specifically argue why that specific district is a partisan gerrymander?
I think that is what they are going to have to do. Yes, it's completely ridiculous, right? Because the idea that your vote is not diluted because you are able to cast a ballot in a gerrymandered district misses the entire point of what these gerrymanders do. What these gerrymanders do is they sort voters by political purposes in order to make it possible for one party to entrench themselves in power for a decade. It is a state. The very act of gerrymandering a statewide map is statewide. It's made up of all of these districts, but all of them are pieces of a puzzle, right?
Right.
So to say that simply because you are allowed to vote in one of those districts and your vote still matters in that district does not mean that you are able to actually translate your vote into political power in the state capitol, or that you have the ability to call back those legislators if they embark on a political course you disagree with.
And we saw that very specifically in the other case, certainly in Maryland, where there was just one U.S. House district in question and where the Democrats actually admitted they redrew this U.S. House district for partisan advantage. Am I correct that they didn't try to hide from that in the Maryland case?
They did not. The depositions in that case are are very clear. The Democrats in the emails, they talked about going after an 8-0 map in that state when they realized they couldn't do that without putting a couple of incumbents at risk.
Mm-hmm.
They decided to draw a safe 7-1 map. And if you take a look at those districts in Maryland, they snake all over the state. It's one of those times when you can simply look at a map and say, okay, something is wrong here.
And yet they struck that one down too, the Supreme Court did, or at least punted it back. On what basis? Why wasn't that one accepted? You would think the Republicans on the court would say, take the opportunity to say, we don't like what the Democrats admitted doing here.
Well, what the court said in that case was a little bit different. The court was being asked to force a new map to be drawn right now and to grant immediate relief in that case. Mm-hmm. The court declined to do so and instead sent it back down to the lower court to be re-argued and for that case to continue. The problem is, by punting, the clock is going to run out
mm-hmm.
on this entire cycle. These maps are in place for 10 years. They are adopted after the census in the 0 year, so these 2011 maps are going to be around until after the 2020 election. These decisions today essentially mean that the 2018 election is going to be run on unconstitutional on maps that courts have declared unconstitutional.
Yep.
In North Carolina, in Wisconsin, that these Maryland voters are still not going to have an opportunity to elect a congressional delegation that actually reflects the partisan breakdown of the state.
Yep.
And that the Republicans have essentially been able to run out the clock to steal in some ways the entire decade of power, especially in state legislatures around the country. And it's going to set up a 2020 process, unless if somehow the court does something before then, that is an even greater partisan free-for-all than it even was last time around.
And it looks like they're going to have another opportunity, whether they take it or not, I don't know, another opportunity at least before the 2010 census in North Carolina, where you have a federal court for the first time has found the entire North Carolina U.S. House map to be an unlawful partisan gerrymander. They've ordered U.S. House maps, new U.S. House maps for the entire state. That case, I guess, did not come in time to be heard by the Supreme Court this past term. So, but they did put it on hold until, I guess, next term for a ruling next year. I guess next June at this point at the earliest. So that means, as you say, they're able, even if this goes the right way next year, they will have gotten away with almost an entire decade stealing various U.S. House and state legislative seats. Doesn't it underscore the fact that we have a real problem here? If they can get away with this scam, if they can do something 10 years ago and basically election after election after election get away with it?
We have a serious problem, and it is only getting worse. The kind of technology and partisan intent that made this possible in 2010 and 2011 has only intensified. When map makers sit down in 2021 after this census, which, as we know and as you've covered so well, is also fraught with so many different political problems,
mm-hmm.
They are going to have more data, better technology, and they will be able to draw even more surgically precise maps. And that litigation will presumably begin right after 2022,
yep.
And it will probably run until 2029, and another decade will be lost. The court had a moment here when it had the opportunity to stand up for a democracy and for fairness and the idea that every vote counts. Justice Kennedy laid out a standard 14 years ago in the Veith case out of Pennsylvania, the last time this came
mm-hmm.
before the court, and the lawyers in the Maryland and Wisconsin case followed his roadmap precisely, and Kennedy today still has not seen enough to actually do something. And it is to all of our detriment as we head toward 2018 and 2020. Fair maps and votes counting should not be a partisan issue. It should be a basic issue of small d democratic rights. And we are getting farther and farther away from that, and it's going to be very ugly.